Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. In this podcast, we will be discussing some playoff performances that may have changed a player's outlook for fantasy next season. Let's get it. And with me today, I've got a new friend. I've got Evan here with me. Evan is from the Apples and Ginos Discord. He's reached out and we've had some conversations back and forth. And we kind of came up with this idea for an episode here: 8 playoff performers who changed their narrative based on their playoff performances. And I think it'll be interesting to dig into these players with you, Evan. What was your take on the playoffs overall? How did you enjoy the playoffs that was?
Thanks so much for having me, Nate. Great to be here and talk fantasy hockey. Love the playoffs, great playoffs. Kind of like every year, I feel like the first round is always the best, the most exciting,
Yeah.
kind of seeing who gets out. The rematch was good, Edmonton, Florida. Kind of similar to probably what most people were thinking that aren't huge Florida Panther fans. Kind of building on their second cup in 2 years here back to back is it's okay, but I would have liked to have seen McDavid get his first cup. But a
Yeah.
lot of interesting takes and performances from different players that could affect their fantasy outlook for next season. So excited to talk about it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think the vast majority of hockey fans were probably rooting for McDavid's first cup there, but sometimes you get what you get. And that is, like, I mean, kudos to the Panthers. They've built an absolute juggernaut over there. And it really does seem like every series they just got better and better as the series wore on. They just found ways to pick apart every team that they're against and eventually just started caving them in completely. So, absolute kudos to them. Looks like they're going to return much of what's made them terrible to play against in the playoffs. So, yeah, we'll get into some of that for sure. The first player, though, that I wanted to bring to the table here today is Mikko Rantanen. So, Rantanen goes for 22 points, 9 goals in 18 games played, plays 20 minutes, 46 seconds, average time on ice. And, the underlying stats were pretty solid, but I wouldn't say they were like elite. 8.0 shots per 60, 9.6 individual scoring chances for per 60. The on ice stuff, kind of good, not great there as well. It was really uber efficient though: 88% IPP, 18% shooting percentage, 13.7% on ice shooting percentage. Obviously, has an incredible run against his former team, the Avalanche, and did kind of go quiet a bit against the Oilers there in the later part. So we won't hold that against him too much since he basically willed the Stars to a win over the Avalanche previously. But I think it is pretty interesting to think about Rantanen. I mean, it was already going to be interesting to think about Rantanen given no changes, but we are going to have a lot of changes. Mason Marchment already shipped out by Dallas this offseason. They are in desperate need of clearing cap space to sign players. Matt Duchene does re-sign a pretty sweetheart deal there for him to come back, point per game player at 4.5 mil per year. That's pretty ridiculous in this day and age with the cap going up. So they get that piece of business done. They've still got more to do. We'll get into it later, but there's been Jason Robertson trade talk. What does the firing of Pete DeBoer do to this team is the biggest question in my mind. What is the effect of the new coach who has still not been announced as of the time that we're recording this here on Sunday night, the 22nd? What is the effect of the new coach? Time on ice, power play, line mates, all that may change for Mikko Rantanen going into next year. Like style of play, quite honestly. It's been talked about at length how Rantanen was not a great fit for the Carolina system. They really thought that they could just make it work based on the fact that he's an elite player in the league, and it really didn't seem like that was coming to fruition at all. So, what happens if the new coach shows up and he wants to play the Carolina system? And what does that look like for Mikko Rantanen? So, I guess I'll pitch it over to you there, Evan. What's your take on Rantanen? the unsettled situation with potential shakeup in the Dallas top six there. What do you think is kind of the most likely outcome for Rantanen next year?
It's one of those things where when Mikko Rantanen first got traded, it was such a shock. I had to look at my phone every day for like 2 weeks to make sure that it was real because I couldn't believe it. But he goes to Carolina and just clearly was not a fit for him there. Then he goes to Dallas and he did okay during the remainder of the regular season, but it wasn't anything mind blowing. And then you get to the playoffs and all of a sudden he was looking like the best player in the playoffs for the vast majority of it. My thought is like when Mikko Rantanen got traded, I almost hopped off the Mikko Rantanen train entirely. Next year, like, well, he's going to fall in drafts, and I don't know that I want to risk taking him because we don't know how it's going to shake out.
Right.
What he did in Dallas in the playoffs was very impressive. I think that he still is that player. I think he is that guy. Once he builds chemistry with his new line mates, Rupe Hintz, that top power play is lethal when they got everyone back. And I do think he, still has easily the potential to be, a 90-point player. I don't know if he gets back to, the 105, 110-point seasons he had alongside Nathan MacKinnon, but if the price is right in draft season, I think he's still there. I just don't know that he gets back to the elite of the elite like we saw him previously.
Yeah, I think that is the key question for me. Thinking about where drafts are going to go next year, I think we have some idea of what the first few picks are going to be. I think you're going to get McKinnon, you're going to get McDavid, you're going to get Kucherov. I think Makar is going to go really high. Obviously, Draisaitl is going to go really high. Pasternak, Kaprizov, Matthews, I think will be in the next group for a lot of people. I think Matthews will probably fall based on this past season a little bit. And then after that, I think people are going to have a lot of questions about a guy like Jack Hughes. I think Mikko Rantanen could potentially be right there, putting him, somewhere around the 8-9 spot in a lot of drafts. And to me, that might feel a little bit rich, just given there's more uncertainty. Like, regardless of who the new coach is, I think there is just more uncertainty with him than a lot of other first round caliber players. And that's going to be tough for me to stomach that high in my drafts. So, yeah, there is something to that. The other side of that is it could be another situation where he's just identified by the new coach as the guy. He gets 22 minutes in Dallas the same way he always got 22 minutes a night in Colorado, and he's just super efficient. Obviously, they don't have a Nate MacKinnon, they don't have a Cale Makar in Dallas, but they've got some pretty solid players, guys who can definitely play off of a guy as talented as Rantanen and get the puck in the net at the end of the day. So yeah, I think he is gonna go probably in that 8-9 range if I had to guess as of right now, but I don't know if I'm gonna be comfortable that high up. I think this 22 points in 18 games in the playoffs is gonna push him there. Everybody's gonna see, look, like he can do it in the new place, and they're not gonna necessarily build in the potential risk from the new coach factor, and yeah, the potential for it not to go quite so swimmingly over the course of a full season. All right, let's move on to the next player here. This is one that you brought to the table, Evan. Matthew Tkachuk. He goes for 8 goals, 23 points in 23 games played, 17 minutes, 23 seconds average time on ice. What would you like to tell us about Matthew Tkachuk?
Matthew Tkachuk, he was impressive, man. You got to give it to him. 6.15 shots per 60, IPP 67, shooting percentage 19.51, scores C4 16.05, on ice scoring chances 4 per 60, 7.35. I think the most impressive part about this is that he did this all with a torn adductor muscle off of the bone and a sports hernia. So I don't know what you can say about that. I mean, the guy just elevates his game in the playoffs, but he was tied for third in the playoffs with 23 points in 23 games. So, super impressive stuff from Matthew Tkachuk. His advanced stats actually weren't as good as, the regular season after playing through this injury, but he still got it done. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of more the player that he is. What's interesting to me is that, I think it's something where Matthew Tkachuk being, a few seasons removed from his, 100 plus point seasons and now only playing 52 games in the regular season, I think he's somebody that might actually fall a little bit in drafts this upcoming year because people will look at that and say, well, he didn't quite get to that point total. And, there's potential concern for this injury, I think he's somebody that truly, when he is at the best of his game, is one of the best players in the NHL. There was a period of time from November 27 to December 7 in 6 games. He had 11 points, this past season. And I remember this because someone I was playing against had Matthew Tkachuk and just completely went off against me. So, you don't forget that kind of thing. But, I think that, he really showed who he is in this playoffs. And I think going into next year, he's somebody that, his ADP in Yahoo was 11. So I don't know that I would take him that high still, but I think he's going to fall, further than that this upcoming year. And I think I'd be interested in Matthew Tkachuk at that point.
Yeah, when Blake and I did our way too early mock draft back in April, I took Matthew Tkachuk on the back end of the turn, the 13 spot in that draft that we did, and I think that he's probably going to fall further than that. To be quite honest with you, like middle of the second round, maybe even late second round in a lot of drafts. I wouldn't be surprised to see that, quite honestly, and I would be loving life to be picking him up in that kind of range. I think that he's probably not, Florida has really kind of figured this thing out. They're not going to run their guys into the ground in the regular season. They know they're going to make the playoffs. They don't have to try hard in the regular season. They're going to try to get everybody through to the playoffs healthy once again. They're going to limit minutes for everybody they possibly can. They have the luxury of doing that because they're so deep everywhere and they have such great contracts across the board. So I think that most likely you're just not going to ever see that kind of 100+ point ceiling outside of some just like outlandish percentages where he just runs extremely hot for like the entire year basically, which is still possible and that is exciting. But most likely you're looking at like a point per game to 90-point player at most likely the best case scenario for Matthew Tkachuk. But he is going to still provide you with all the hits and stuff. So definitely he gives you a lot of peripheral floor on top of it, even if he's not playing his best in terms of putting the puck in the net. So I think the key question to really kind of grapple with here is the over under on the average time on ice for next year. I'm putting the over under at 18 and a half. And I'm curious if you got to if you would quibble with my over under line, if you'd go over or under on 18 and a half minutes time on ice for next year.
I would have to go under on that. I agree with you in the sense that they're gonna not run their players in the ground. They have 3 to 4 different lines they can roll against other top lines too. We've even seen in the playoffs and throughout the regular season. So you look at someone like Anton Lundell who stepped up when Barkov was out, and his production skyrocketed. You look at Sam Miskevich. You look at some of these other guys that can just step up, and even like someone like Evan Rodriguez. He just you throw him on the top line and he can be productive for a short stretch. So. I think that I agree with you in terms of, his time on ice and his production. But yeah, it's just when you watch him play too, when he's going, and he gets the hits, he gets the shots. And he's just somebody I feel like he gets his points in bunches too for some reason. Like he has games where he'll get like a goal and 3 assists, and 3 of those are on the power play, and you're just, you're loving it in a week with a close matchup.
Yeah, I think, yeah, for myself, I might go over the 18 and a half. So he goes 18-13 average time on ice this year, 18-38 the year before. And then in the big year, he's over 20 minutes before they kind of really dragged everybody's ice time down and kind of got themselves to the playoffs with some miles to spare. So yeah, I think I might go slightly over, but I do think it'll be right around that 18 and a half mark for myself. All right, let's keep moving. Let's talk about a line mate of Matthew Tkachuk's. Have to talk about Sam Bennett. Bennett goes 15 goals, 22 points in 23 games played, 17:33 average time on ice. It wasn't taking on a massive role compared to what he had in the regular season here in the offseason. 10.3 shots per 60 and 12.5 individual scoring chances for per 60. Out of players who made it out of the first round of the playoffs, only Nikolai Ehlers in 8 games played had a higher individual scoring chances for per 60, and obviously Bennett higher than everybody who made it to the third round or beyond. So really impressive run from Sam Bennett. I mean, what can you say about the guy? He's built for the playoffs. He's built for the dirty, not dirty plays of the playoffs, as we've seen throughout the course of it. And Yeah, it seems like, I mean, I think we all have seen the clip that's going around. He's not leaving, apparently. There's actually a good one that I saw today of Aaron Ekblad. When he got up to talk, he said, "My agent called me and said, whatever you do, don't say what Sam Bennett said," which I thought was pretty good. But yeah, obviously vibes are high at the moment for the Florida Panthers, but assuming that he's telling the truth here and that they do find a way to get a deal done, I think we can kind of still expect the same thing for Sam Bennett. I don't think this really changes my outlook for him moving forward. I mean, he shoots nearly 22% in these playoffs. That's obviously not something that he's known for across the rest of his career. He has never really been a super high efficiency guy. His highest shooting percentage in any single season before this, you have to go back. I mean, these aren't even really full seasons, but going back to 2015-16, his real rookie season in the league, he shoots 13.2%, and that's about as good as it ever got for Sam Bennett. So I don't think we should expect him to score at this rate. I don't think this was just a sign of things to come. I think the puck was following him a bit. He was obviously feeling it and converting at a much higher rate than he normally does. Um, yeah, kudos to him. He absolutely fulfilled the role and did it. But I don't really have. I think that some people will probably end up taking him higher. He's going to get paid, a big payday this offseason. He's going to be a name that everybody knows in their fantasy drafts this offseason. And I just think there's probably going to be somebody who's like, oh, yeah, I want the guy who scores goals. Maybe this is the year he scores 35 goals. And I just don't see that as a most likely scenario for Sam Bennett. I don't know, Evan, do you feel any differently about this player?
No, I completely agree with your take. You know, he's somebody that if you wanted, like, I don't know, your third or bench center and he was still there in kind of later rounds, maybe consider it. But yeah, like I wouldn't consider taking him over, quite a bit of other players. I think
Mhm.
he's truly a playoff performer and, just elevates his game. He plays well in those circumstances and we saw it. And, you know, I just don't think, yeah, fantasy wise, he's somebody that you'd want.
Yeah. I think there is something to be said, and we should mention it probably, for the bangers heavy formats, for the peripheral heavy formats, because he does shoot a lot. He is a bit of a chucker, a bit of a soggy boy in that regard. He does like to put shots on net, and so if you're in a league that values shots, that values hits, then he does have some extra value there. And so maybe I honestly think he's probably been typically undervalued in drafts up till this point, just because of the peripheral floor in a lot of cases. But this year, I think, might be the year where that all kind of flips on its head because of this postseason performance. And I think that the shine is going to be worn off for fantasy players. He's going to go at a much higher ADP this year. All right, let's move over to your next player, Evan. Kirill Kaprizov. Only one round for Kaprizov, obviously, but does put up 5 goals, 9 points in 6 games played here. 9.5 shots per 60, 10 individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. Really good stuff. 100% IPP as well. So talk to me about Kaprizov. What do you think is going on with him based on this performance?
I think he just showed that he's that guy. He's going to be the one that steps up and does it all for his team. The question remains, just like it's on here, reinforcements. They got Suter and Parise off the books. So now, who are they going to bring in to support him? Matt Boldy had an okay season by his standards, I would say. I think a lot of us expected him to, take on more of a role, but then you had the Kaprizov injury that happened. So, and then Joel Eriksson's neck went down as well. So they were banged up quite a bit of the year, and I think that really hindered what we could actually see from them on a consistent, healthy basis. I think Kaprizov is somebody that, we start to see in the next, even as early as next year. I would be easily willing to take him in the first round. I actually drafted him in my first round in my main league. His ADP was 14, which I think is criminal
Mhm.
for what he actually brings to the table. But I love Kaprizov. I think he is that player. 100% IPP. I mean, he was involved in everything. Everything runs through him, and I'm excited what he's going to do next year with a healthy season.
Yeah, absolutely concur with all that. Definitely a team that'll be interesting. They'll be throwing some money around for sure. They want they want to sign Kaprizov long term. They want to make him feel like the ship is headed in the right direction here, and probably adding some firepower up front is a big piece of that. So I do expect them to be big players in free agency here, to go after some of that. I am pretty interested to see what that could do for him. That being said, like I do think they've had a pretty good thing going there. Like I don't know that the ceiling necessarily is raised for Kaprizov next year, even if they do bring in more reinforcements. It's more like the floor, right? Like if Boldy and Eriksson Ek got injured and it was just Kaprizov by himself, that would surely have some small negative effect on Kaprizov's ceiling, right? But if they have, Brock Besser and John Tavares now on their team, like that would obviously provide a much more significant floor that they could kind of swap in those other two guys and he wouldn't lose as much if the other players were to go down to injury. Or if, Matt Zuccarello is less efficient, he finally kind of hits the back end of his age curve there and starts to decline in his effectiveness, then maybe that wouldn't have such a distinct effect on Kaprizov. So I do think that the most likely scenario is that he just kind of does what we expect him to do. I think I had him projected for about 115 points last year. He was one of my top rostered players across all formats. Obviously gets injured, and that did hurt in a lot of places. But I have not really changed my baseline expectation for Kaprizov, but I think it will be just that added bit of surety. We talked about the unsure potential of Mikko Rantanen. I think if Minnesota is successful in luring some of these free agents to their team, then yeah, that might be a spot where you feel even that little bit more secure about making the click on Kaprizov. And let's not discount the potential of, Zeev Buium on the back end. If he's the power play quarterback and he's effective, even if he's not playing huge minutes overall, if he's effective at least as a power play quarterback, that would be something that they've sorely lacked basically throughout all of Kaprizov's time there in Minnesota. And so that could actually add another dimension that could potentially raise Kaprizov's ceiling by a little bit as well. So yeah, I think it's wheels up again for Kaprizov next year. I fully expect to have another boatload of Kaprizov in my leagues. All right, my next player is Wyatt Johnston. Johnston only 10 points in 18 games played here. 1921 average time on ice, only 4 goals amongst those 10 points. 6.2 shots per 60, 8.0 individual scoring chances for per 60. The on ice stuff looks pretty mid, to be quite honest with you. It's a 67% IPP, 11.1% shooting percentage, 10.9% on ice shooting percentage. The all three zone stuff from the playoffs does not look terrific. Below average 5v5 scoring chance and scoring chance assist creation. It's really a tough look for Johnston, quite honestly, in these playoffs. They did kind of harness him to the Jamie Benns of the world at times in the postseason and saddle him with some tough minutes as well. And yeah, he is still just 22 years old. He's not a veteran in this league by any stretch, even though he's got a few seasons under his belt at this point, and obviously had a terrific year in general in Dallas. The question that I am really pondering with Wyatt Johnston heading into this offseason, and again with the new coach in town, is he really the 1C here under a new coach? Does Roope Hintz get Rantanen and Robertson as his line mates, right, for the majority of the season? A lot of what Pete DeBoer did was to move players around and try new things and be consistently tinkering, and that just kind of led to a leveling, I think, of the offensive potential across the team. Whereas, a new coach could just say, "No, this is the top line. We're running with it all year." And Wyatt Johnston is now just the 2C, and he's with Duchesne and Seguin. Maybe is the second line, something like that, and it's just not quite as much oomph in terms of the fantasy potential there. So that's the question that I'm kind of mulling over in my head. Maybe we'll get some idea when training camp rolls around, but you're probably, in a lot of cases, you may be making decisions on draft day without that information. So what's your take on Wyatt Johnston? Does the playoff performance here have any effect on your view of the player moving into next year?
Slightly, definitely underwhelming for Wyatt Johnston during the playoffs. I agree with you. It's difficult to say where he's going to settle in that lineup, and that's really going to determine his fantasy value and his production. I think he's an incredible player. I think, heading into this past year, everyone was on Wyatt Johnston. Everyone wanted a piece of him. We saw what he did, in the playoffs before that, and everyone was expecting him to kind of blow up. And he had a good season, but I think, it all depends on where he gets fit into that lineup. If he ends up with Rupe Hintz and Mikko Rantanen, I think, again, he could easily surpass a lot of totals that he has done previously. And, they get rid of Marchment. I think Seattle's the perfect place for Mason Marchment, by the way. I don't know if you feel the same way. Maverick Bork, they bring back. And then I think Ben is still up in the air. But yeah, I really do like Wyatt Johnston as a player. And I think that he has more to give if he gets the deployment and consistency with that.
Yeah, I think that is going to be a big question, one that I'll be pondering, and I'm not sure where it'll lead me, to be quite honest, on Wyatt Johnston. I think he'll just kind of be drafted at the expectation that he does something similar again, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be in on that. I want to be in on the player, and like I think in Dynasty, like long term, I'm still very excited about the player. The individual scoring chance generation is off the charts. He's terrific at that. I expect him to be a high efficiency player, kind of no matter what. But if he is just kind of left out as the fourth guy, the guy who doesn't play on the top line but still gets on the top power play, it is just going to naturally take a bit away from his fantasy potential there. Let's take the Mason Marchment detour for a second because I think that is pretty fun. He does go to Seattle. Obviously, Dallas trying to clear cap space any way they can this offseason, and Seattle is more than willing to oblige. I think it was a third round and fourth round pick, so nothing doing there. That's a deal that a lot of teams I think would have made. Maybe Jim Nill doing right by Mason Marchment a little bit there to get him to a place where he wants to be. That could be the case as well. But yeah, give me your take. Why are you so excited about Mason Marchment in Seattle?
I think he just fits exactly what they're doing, but they have, every player on Seattle, I feel like, is somewhat in the same framework of a player. If they just consistently would get their lines together and really just run a top power play instead of the split deal, I think it'd be great. And I think he could fit in really well there, especially, he's a big body guy, he hits, he plays a gritty game. And I feel like they have, kind of guys that can facilitate the puck to him, like Matty Beniers. I think it would be a good fit for him. And, I don't know that I take Mason Marchment anywhere, but he for sure could be a great waiver player to pick up on certain weeks and kind of see how he does.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's definitely going to be one of these guys. In some ways, it feels like he kind of fits right into this middle six identity that all of their forwards seem to have.
Everyone.
Uh, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they line up, and if we finally do get a top power play unit out of Seattle, if he can find a way to get himself on that, that would definitely be exciting. He's shown the ability to be a high efficiency player so far in both Florida and in Dallas. So interested to see that for sure. All right, headed back over to you. Your third player is Andrei Svechnikov. Svechnikov drops 8 goals, 12 points in 15 games, 1805 average time on ice here. Definitely a step up from a pretty terrible regular season in the playoffs. What does this mean to you?
I'm so conflicted on Svechnikov. He is somebody that I've taken in prior years, somebody that I've avoided recently, and I can't really get a beat on what this player is truly capable of and, what he's going to bring to the table year in, year out. In the playoffs, he was a beast, and he gets, a full minute more time on ice. It seems like Rod Brendamore is trusting him in the playoffs to be that guy. The vast majority of the regular season, he's playing with Kakaniemi and some other winger on Carolina. And then, during the playoffs, he's first line with Aho and Jarvis, which is exactly where you want to be. Shots on goal per 68.85. He's 20% shooting percentage in the playoffs. Individual Corsi for 23, ninth in the playoffs. Individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 11.94, eighth in the playoffs. He did great. He was one of the main reasons Carolina made it as far as they did. I struggle to see, next year, is he going to maintain that top line deployment? And I just don't know that that's the case because they switch up the line so much in Carolina. But he's similar to some of these other players. He's very young. He's 25 years old. I think he's like 30 every time I look at him because he's, you feel like he's been in the league forever, but he shoots, he hits, he's a perfect fantasy hockey type player. The the consistency is the question for me and his deployment. But I think if, and he's had some injury stints. I think he's only played 82 games once in his rookie year.
Mm-hmm.
But if he can stay healthy and he gets the deployment, I think we will see a big season from Svechnikov. And I think he will, he had name value, and I think he's going to fall again in drafts. I would think, just based on, his year this year and, kind of similar thought process from other fantasy managers. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I do think he'll probably fall. He has the 30-goal season back in 2021-22, and everybody is crowning him the next superstar. And since then, it's just kind of slowly fallen off from there. 23 goals in 64 games in 22-23, 19 goals in 59 games in 23-24, and then only 20 in 72 this year in the regular season. Yeah, 56% IPP this year. That's going to bounce back. 11.2% shooting percentage is more or less in line with what he's done. Maybe he ticks up a little bit more towards 12%, but not much change I'm expecting there. The on-ice shooting percentage looks about right. It's really, yet again, the question of, will Rod Brind'Amour trust him? Will Rod Brind'Amour use him? 2 years in a row now where he's averaged just right around 17 minutes average time on ice. This is a guy I have full confidence, given 20 minutes a night in a big role on some other team, would just absolutely crush. The thing is, on paper, he's a terrific fit for Carolina. He does all the things that they want to do really well, but definitely has a huge playoffs here. And yeah, it's only one playoffs, but as Carolina evaluates how they want to play, they've had this string of having good, not great playoff runs and getting absolutely just torpedoed by Florida in the conference finals this year. I think this is an organization that is probably taking a little bit of a step back internally this year and evaluating what worked for them and what didn't. And Svechnikov, having arguably the best playoffs of anybody on Carolina, I think that has to matter for something. Whether that matters specifically to Rod Brind'Amour, who's holding the controls to his deployment, is definitely up for debate, though. And so where I'm left with is I really want to see the ADP. I think it could slip again this year. And yeah, again, this is a guy who hits a ton. And so if hits and shots are valuable to you in your leagues, then this is definitely a player I think that could have a big time season, run a little bit hot. We see this so often with these low shooting percentage players. They all have that one season where they shoot 15 or 16%, and that's everybody's like, "Oh, wow, superstar player." And no, it's just that one season, but I want to be in on those guys, right? For that one season where it does happen, where the stars align and they do just kind of go off and have that perfect season. And Svechnikov to me absolutely is the ideal of that, where the stars could align. You look at what Marty Necas, he was kind of down in, it seemed like, in Rod Brind'Amour's doghouse a little bit the season prior, and then he comes out this year and they're just using him a ton. So maybe there's a similar situation for Svechnikov where yeah, they really reevaluate what they think they need to do this offseason to turn them into a team that can get over the hump in the playoffs. And Svechnikov is a part of that, and they kind of ride him a little bit more. Again, it's all possibility, it's all conjecture at this point, but I think he's going to drop a little bit in drafts, and I think I'm just going to want to be in on this kind of prototype of a player who does shoot, does hit, does give you some floor in that regard. And if the stars do align for him, he could have an absolutely astronomical effect on your lineup if everything does go his way. All right. My last player is going to be Carter Verhaeghe. Verhaeghe, as you mentioned, Tkachuk, 23 points in 23 games. Verhaeghe also 23 points in 23 games, 7 goals in there. 1854 average time on ice. So yeah, ties with Tkachuk and Sam Reinhart for the team lead. Only Draisaitl and McDavid, and I think Bouchard as well, had more points on the total playoffs. 7.2 shots per 60, 11.0 individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. Yeah, right up there in that regard. And really elite on-ice stats to go with it. Rocks at 59% IPP, 13.5% shooting percentage, 16.3% on-ice shooting percentage. So definitely the on-ice shooting percentage. He played a lot with Bennett. He played a lot with Tkachuk. Both those guys shot the lights out. So that makes some sense there. And this is a guy that I talked about all year as the unluckiest player in the NHL. And I think just he kind of got some of that luck back here in the playoffs. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean anything for us in fantasy unless you're playing some fantasy in the playoffs, some playoff fantasy specific games. But it just kind of re-solidified things for me. I think Carter Verhaeghe is going to be a guy that people will, everybody will kind of take the summer and kind of cleanse their mind of the postseason, and also like even among the top end players on Florida, like Verhaeghe was not a player who's being mentioned as having some terrific postseason. Even with this point per game postseason, it was all Marchand, it was all. Even Tkachuk, but Bennett as well. Barkov for the defensive stuff. Lundell for being the best third line center in the league. All these things, all these players were getting their accolades, and it felt like Verhaeghe was never really even mentioned. And I think he had a terrific playoffs here, just kind of reestablishing to me what I think of the player. The fact that he came out like this really does mean something to me and my confidence in drafting him next year. And I think he's going to be a huge value because people are going to come back in September. They're going to look at last year's regular season stats. They're not going to look at the playoff stats, and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, this guy had a terrible year. I'm not going to take him with a high pick. And so I think you're going to get Verhaeghe at value next year. The big question that will obviously have a big effect on his value is, does he get power play one in 2025-26? What's your thought about that power play one in Florida? Just knowing what we know now, obviously we can't foresee everything in the future, but let's assume Sam Bennett resigns. How do you see that top unit shaking out? Like obviously you're probably going to have Seth Jones on the back end. You're going to have Barkov there. You're going to have Tkachuk there. Is it Bennett who's getting on this top unit? Who do you think are the players that are going to comprise this top unit for Florida next year?
Yeah, I think I think Carter Verhaeghe should be there. Honestly, he's proven that he can be that guy. 30, 40 goal scorer, an elite shot, and they had Sam Miskevich there for a while. They had. I think in the playoffs they were doing kind of like a weird, like they had Seth Jones and Aaron Ekblad. Like that's not going to be
Yep.
during the regular season, I don't think.
No.
But I think he's the best fit, honestly, when you look at it. Sam Bennett's never consistently been on the top power play. He had stints here and there, but I think he best fits with that power play too, and his even strength role. But yeah, I think Carter Verhaeghe should be the guy on power play one. And I agree with you. The quietest 23 points in 23 games you'll ever see in a playoffs. And not get mentioned. And, with the year that he had, I think he's going to be an absolute steal next year in drafts. And I totally want to be in on that as well. He's somebody that I think, I was scared taking this past year because I think he went higher than, what I thought he maybe should have. But just like you said, you're preaching it all year. Carter Verhaeghe's luck is going to turn around. It just didn't happen, for us fantasy managers. But, he does it to win the cup. And I think that next year, hopefully that carries over.
Yep, absolutely. I'm definitely going to be interested in what the Verhaeghe ADP looks like when we get into drafts this year. All right, back over to you, Evan. Your last player here is Jason Robertson. An interesting one here: 4 goals, 6 points in 11 games played, 1550 average time on ice. But obviously, the big story comes back from injury to play in these playoffs. Talk to me about Jason Robertson.
Yeah, so Jason Robertson obviously missed the first round, came back. They were clearly limiting his ice time, easing him back in. His stats actually were somewhat on par with his regular season stuff, which was interesting to me. Shots per 60, 7.57, IPP 60, individual Corsi 4 per 60, 16.5, individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 10.67. Those are all relatively close to his regular season stuff. Jason Robertson is somebody that I drafted personally at 33, which was his ADP this year. And I thought I was getting a steal. And I think a lot of people did based on his prior performance, 100 plus point seasons. And then, he comes out, but he did have that off season kind of benign cyst removed from his foot. And I think that really hindered him in the early going. In the second half of the season, he was on fire. Since January 1st, he had 24 goals, which was tied for first in the NHL. He had 47 points, which was tied for fifth in the NHL. This all really goes back to Dallas and their cap situation. There's been some rumors about Jason Robertson getting moved. I just don't know that they do want to move on from him. He's still really young as well. I feel like he is a good fit on their team. It's just really what's going to happen with him. If he stays in Dallas, I am slightly concerned now that Rantanen is there that they will kind of both like cannibalize each other to a certain extent, and neither of them will truly hit what their ceiling could be if the other wasn't there. But I still do think that he's somebody that could be point per game or slightly above. And, depending on, again, where he would go in drafts, you'd want to be in on that. I think that some people might look at this season as, again, like kind of a down year for him. And I think that if he gets healthy and, can establish himself, it might be interesting, but it really just depends on where he ends up. And kind of like you said, too, the deployment, where is he at in the lineup? Is he getting shifted to the second line? I can't see it, but with a new coach, you never know. They move Wyatt Johnston up there with Hinson Roberts or Rantanen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's there's a lot of ways that this could play out. To be quite honest with you, I mean, by the time this episode comes out, there could be news on Jason Robertson with the amount of trade talk that's been swirling. There's still more stuff coming out. Like at the end of the day, he has a pretty solid season, right? 35 goals, 80 points in 82 games played. Gets injured, comes back, and like towards the end of the playoffs, it really felt like he was just kind of coming into his own. And unfortunately, the rest of the team seemed to be falling apart against Edmonton while he was coming into his own. So it was kind of like passing ships in the night to some extent. But yeah, the beginning of the season definitely didn't go his way. He only scored 6 points in 9 games in October, 7 points in 13 games in November with only one goal. But from December onward, like December, he goes 15 points in 14 games, 21 points in 15 games in January, 10 points in 8 games in February, 16 points in 15 games in March, and then only 5 and 8 in April with the injury in there. The interesting part for me is, yeah, obviously the move, like the potential move. I think honestly, it'd probably be a pretty good thing for him to be traded. Like wherever he is traded to, is trading for a guy that they're going to lock up on a $10 million plus deal for a long time, and he's going to be a first line top of the lineup, top power play player for whoever he goes to. And honestly, I don't think the deployment can get worse from what it was the past couple of years under DeBoer. 18-19 in 23-24, 17-47 this year, right? And I don't think that can possibly get any worse. He's been really efficient basically throughout his career. The numbers did dip this year, but I think, like I said, we can explain a lot of that away by the fact that the early season was so tough for him the first couple months of the season before he really got things underway. And so I'm kind of left being pretty excited, honestly, about Jason Robertson. I like that he kind of started to heat up towards the back end of the playoffs in the 11 games that he got into. It was only 6 points in total, but it really did seem like he was coming back and, yeah, being one of the more effective stars there. I don't know where his ADP is going to fall, and that part is going to be interesting. In the end, he still did score 80 points, so that probably puts him at least in the third round, if not the back end of the second again. Probably, honestly, not that far off from that 33 ADP that you're mentioning. So that'll be interesting. Again, I don't think it gets worse for him next year, right? I don't see really how it gets worse, assuming he's at full health going into next year. I really do think that this is a guy that we could be looking at as a 90 plus point player. And yeah, definitely a guy I'd be interested in back of the second, early third, whatever it is, when it's all said and done. Definitely a player I'll be interested in, whether he's on Dallas, whether he's on basically any other team in the league, to be quite honest with you. I really can't think of a situation where I'd be like super down on Jason Robertson, because I do think anybody trading for him is trading for him to make him a centerpiece.
We'll take him in Detroit.
Yeah, definitely. I think there are probably 31 other teams that would also take Jason Robertson given the opportunity. All right. Well, we've made it to the end here. Thanks, Evan, for joining me on this one. If you, the listener or the viewer, as the case may be, have made it this far, click the link in the description, join the Discord community, like, rate, review, subscribe, comment. Really does help us out. You can find us on Patreon. You can find us on Discord. Come tell us who you thought were the biggest playoff performers, who you thought changed their fantasy stock heading into next year with their playoff performance. But I think that's going to be all that we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band that are there for supplying music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.